So do appreciate everyone being here this evening. Appreciate the chance to talk to you this evening. And I want to look at an event in the New Testament that we see and kind of compare it with something similar we see in the world today. So first, I want us to look at that New Testament event and look at that account. And that's going to be in Acts chapter 19. And this is regarding the silversmith and the other craftsmen who felt that their income was being harmed by Paul's teaching of the gospel. Because he was preaching basically against idols, which we know that Christians and Jews do not worship idols. And they were making their living creating idols of Diana or Artemis, depending on Greek or Roman name, and maintaining that temple and things like that they had in Ephesus. It was a huge temple. It was really one of those wonders of the world. And of course, now it's in ruins. I think I read that it was in a swamp or something. I don't know, but it's in ruins anyway. So we want to look at Acts chapter 19, verses 24 through 28. For a certain man named Demetrius, a silversmith, who made silver shrines of Diana, brought no small profit to the craftsmen. He called them together with the workers of similar occupation and said, Men, you know that we have our prosperity by this trade. Moreover, you see and hear that not only at Ephesus, but throughout almost all Asia, this Paul has persuaded and turned away many people, saying that they are not gods which are made with hands. So not only is this trade of ours in danger of falling into disrepute, but also the temple of the great goddess Diana may be despised and her magnificence destroyed, whom all Asia and the world worship. Now when they heard this, they were full of wrath and cried out, saying, Great is Diana of the Ephesians. So we want to look at this and say, what is the motivation here of the silversmith, right? So his first motivation is money. It's basically just that. To be fair, he's very honest about his motivations. He says right off that their trade is in danger, and that's their livelihood, and they make no small amount of money from this, right? It's not a small profit, it's a big profit. And he's talking about their prosperity. So they're making a lot of money off this trade. And then you look at who he called to help him in this, and he called other craftsmen, other people who are making money in the same way. So they're all kind of a band together, making money off of this religious practice of worshiping this idol of Diana, or, going to the temple, all those things that were involved in that worship. And I don't know all those things. So, and then the reasoning he gives those people, it's the same, right? Their trade is in danger. Their money is in danger. And the temple might become unpopular or unused, right? Which it has. That much was actually kind of prophetic in a way. But the last thing on the list is actually that Diana is not a god, or might not be perceived as a goddess. That was like on the bottom of his list. So that was their motivation here. If we look at the next verses 29 through 34, he had called these craftsmen together, and they proceeded to stir up the city. They stirred up people against Paul and those with him that were preaching the gospel. So the whole city was filled with confusion and rushed into the theater with one accord, having seized Gaius and Aristarchus, and that may not be exactly correct, Macedonians, Paul's travel companions. They were traveling with Paul. And when Paul wanted to go into the people, the disciples would not allow him. Then some of the officials of Asia, who were his friends, and sent to him pleading that he would not venture into the theater. Some therefore cried, okay, I kind of read that too fast and I kind of mixed that up. Let me pardon for just a minute. Okay, so some of the officials of Asia who were his friends sent to him, Paul, pleading that he would not venture into the theater. They didn't want him to go into this crowd of people that were obviously angry at him. So that was a good idea, right? Now here we're switching in verse 32 to the crowd. We're switching to the crowd. Some therefore cried one thing and some another, for the assembly was confused, and most of them did not know why they had come together. And they drew Alexander out of the multitude, the Jews putting him forward, and Alexander motioned with his hand and wanted to make his defense to the people. But when they found out that he was a Jew, all with one voice cried out for about 2 hours, "Great is Diana of the Ephesians." So they were drowning him out for 2 hours. So our real narrative behind all this, if we look at this, is money and profit and their trade. That's our real behind the scenes narrative. The false narrative that's being put forth, though, and that the people are yelling and screaming about, is to protect this religion of Diana, of worshiping this false god, right? So what's the result here? We have the men stirring up the whole city against Paul and his companions, and they grab his companions. They don't get Paul, and I would guess that their purpose was going to be to do some harm or maybe even kill them. We don't see that play out, which is great, but it does seem that there was some wrong intent there. Does the crowd that, comes into this, do they really understand the issue? If we look at verse 32, we see at the second half of that most of them did not know why they had come together. So they didn't even know what the uproar was about. They were just following the crowd, right? They were just, everybody else was going, so they went as well. So then, was the crowd willing to hear any opposition or maybe voice of reason or anything of that nature? No. When they brought forth Alexander, once they found out he was a Jew, and thus they would know that he was an opponent to idols and worshiping in this temple and that sort of thing. Well, no, they refused to listen. They drowned him out for 2 hours, right? So again, the agenda here is money and profit as far as from these men. Now, what was the hidden intent? Well, it was an attempt by Satan, of course, to stop the gospel, to stop Paul. I think we can understand that. Had the city clerk not calmed the people down, which you can see in the following verses 35 through 41, Paul and his companions, and especially his companions that they had, could have been injured or killed. So, I was listening to the Bible Monday morning. I do this a lot of times first thing in the morning when I'm going to work and getting things ready and all that. So, I was listening, and I was listening to the NIV version, and this verse is what caught my attention out of this whole story, okay? This is the verse that caught my attention. The assembly was in confusion. Some were shouting one thing, some another. Most of the people did not even know why they were there. And that was the portion that caught my attention. It reminded me of a video I had seen. Just like these people, most of these people in Acts, most of the crowd did not know why they were there. Well, I'd seen a video of some of these student protesters. Now, we know that it's been a thing lately that across the country, different universities have had a lot of protesters protesting, against Israel and different things. It really doesn't, in a way, it doesn't even matter what they're protesting against. But the fact is that some of them, when they were asked what they were protesting, why they were there, a number of them had no idea. They could not give an answer as to what they were protesting or why they were doing that. They were just following the crowd, right? They were just going along with everyone else. So, in some more recent videos even, I did see some other things on this later, when people were questioning and some of the students again, and this is more recent now. The first video I'm thinking of was from a week or two ago, and now this is closer in. Now they've coached a lot of the students to either say nothing at all or to say, well, you have to speak to the organizer of the protest. So again, I mean, to me, this really just speaks again to the fact that they don't know what they're protesting or why they're doing that, right? So they're just following the crowd again. That to me, that doesn't really help the situation, but that's how they've coached them to try to handle that, because I'm sure those other videos kind of made some of them look bad. I mean, of course, to me, I thought it was silly. But anyway, so it made me want to look further into this account here we see in Acts and kind of just see if there's some comparison to what we're seeing going on with some of these protests. So in looking at these protests that are happening, it appears they're not really normal or natural, okay? Just like the silversmith, he called up the craftsmen and they stirred up the people. A number of the protesters appear to be paid agitators. And if true, then their motivation, again, is not really sincere. It's more of a greed money thing. They're paid to initiate the protest, right? Now, we do know that a number of the protesters, are not students or part of the faculty. For instance, at Columbia University in New York, they arrested around 282 protesters. And over 100 of them had no affiliation with the school as a student or faculty. So some could be, give them a break. Some could be maybe friends or sympathizers in some way. But if over a third of your student protest, if over a third is not actually students, then it's a little suspicious, right? It doesn't seem very genuine. It's also worth noting that the police and the city officials and the administration of the university mentioned also that they thought these were paid agitators. And I tend to believe, since they are closer to the issue, that is probably true. So, like in Ephesus, the motivation for the protests appear to just be money, at least in the initial thing. That appears to be it, not a true concern for people's lives. Now, we don't know in this case, assuming that they're being paid, we don't know in this case that who is behind all of that. But they brought in these agitators as allies again, and they stirred up as many students as they could. Just like the silversmith and the craftsman stirred up the crowd at Ephesus. But I think we know the real source of evil and deception like that. I don't think that's a surprise. But that brings us to that comparison that most of the students, like most of the crowd there at Ephesus, probably don't really understand or know what they're protesting. They're just kind of following the crowd. So then, like in Ephesus, most of the protesters have become, or at least in the cases I've seen, the things I've seen, they've become quite prejudiced against Jews, stopping Jewish students from being able to go to their classes, even if they've, paid to be there. And I know of at least one professor who I saw that was a Jewish fellow, and he couldn't even get on campus. So, they're also trying to block access to parts of the campuses from different people who are not in their group. So a lot of these activities, right, a lot of these actions are wrong. Again, kind of like that crowd in Ephesus who had grabbed these men, and we know they were not up to good things. They were going to be up to something bad, right? And then when people have tried to talk to a lot of the protesters, and I'm not saying every one, but a lot of them, again, drown out any opposing voice or anyone who tries to speak reason to them, and they just yell and scream, and we see a lot of that. It's hard to speak to people who will not listen. So we have a real narrative. To me, the real narrative appears to be money and this prejudice against Jews and against Israel. And then we have this false narrative that they present to try to prevent genocide in Gaza. And then they have another narrative that they present to, but I think this is more of a true narrative when they say from the river to the sea. They're talking about killing all the Jews. That's what they're talking about. So just, That's the narratives that are going on there from, what we see, what we know. Then the protesters have started at the colleges, have started vandalizing, destroying property. We know that. I understood that at least at one university, they took over a whole building. And the universities have gotten more serious about this now. And I know they're trying to, they've had people arrested. They've done a number of different things. They've suspended students. They've not allowed some of them to graduate. And some graduation ceremonies were canceled completely because of the protests. Now, the schools will let out for summer shortly. So I expect a lot of this will kind of calm down and kind of blow over, because a lot of the students, a lot of people will go home, right, for the summer, or they'll go somewhere else, something like that. But I want us to see some fallout that came out of this. These events were disturbing enough, or are disturbing enough, so I understand some of this is still ongoing. But our government decided that they needed to be involved as well. And as you know, sometimes that's good and sometimes that's bad. And in this case, part of the fallout is this bill, this H.R. 6090, the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act of 2023. They probably started this late last year or something. That's probably why it's dated for last year. But anyway, the problem with this bill, and this is it's passed the House, it's in the Senate now. And let's see, the problem with this bill is that with certain changes now, as it stands now, not, but with some changes, this bill could possibly be used to outlaw certain Bible verses, certain things that we teach and we know are true, right? It shouldn't happen. It would depend, again, on this being edited somewhat, and I'll show that. And it would also depend on some interpretation of the law, which I would hope it would not go that way. But it's just a risk. It's something we need to be aware of. So in the bill, they're using let me read this. This is pretty long. The International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance working definition of anti-Semitism. Now, this is a international group. They're not here. And they're using that definition to define anti-Semitism. And the main problem with using that definition, other than the fact that our government doesn't even control that definition, which is not smart in my mind, but is this statement here that I have up on the board. Using the symbols, this is one of the things they would say is anti-Semitism. Using the symbols and images associated with classic anti-Semitism, that is, claims of Jews killing Jesus, or blood libel to that effect of Jews killing Jesus, to characterize Israel or Israelis. And in the present tense, we can look at that and we understand that in the present tense, that's okay, because no one alive today is responsible for Jesus going to the cross, right? None of us were there. None of them were there. No one was there that's alive today. So in that sense, it's okay. But there is a worry that this could be misconstrued. And there's several verses, if we look at them in the Bible, like Matthew, I just have a few examples, but like here, Matthew chapter 27, verses 24 and 25. When Pilate saw that he was getting nowhere, but that instead an uproar was starting, he took water and washed his hands in front of the crowd. I am innocent of this man's blood, he said. It is your responsibility. All the people answered, his blood is on us and on our children. Well, we know the crowd was Jewish, right? So we know who this is. Again, like I said, we know plainly that these are people 2,000 years ago. That's not anybody that's alive today. You're not going to meet any of these people on the street. But there is certain prejudiced people who would take that the way that they are mentioning in their definition. Another example, Acts chapter 2, verse 23. This man was handed over to you by God's deliberate plan and foreknowledge, and you, with the help of wicked men, put him to death by nailing him to the cross. Again, speaking to Jews, one thing I really like about this verse, though, is this verse acknowledges God's deliberate plan. So really, if you back up the trail of responsibility or authority, we're going straight up to God. So anyway, again, this is just another biblical example of something that could be problematic if that was misconstrued or taken the wrong way, if that bill was. And then Acts chapter 4, verse 10, then know this, you and all the people of Israel, it is by the name of Jesus Christ of Nazareth, whom you crucified, but whom God raised from the dead, that this man stands before you healed. And you might remember this, where they had healed this man, and the Jews were in an uproar over that, and they had to go before the Sanhedrin, if I remember right. Still, I say, this shouldn't happen, but it's something we want to be aware of. I'm going to show you the last part of the bill, and this is why I say this really shouldn't happen. But you may have heard about this bill. You may have heard that it was going to be a problem for us. And I just want to make sure that we're, on one hand, aware of the possibility of trouble, but on the other hand, be aware that from what I see on this clause especially, it shouldn't be an issue. But it could be changed. It's just in the Senate right now. So I just want to mention this. This is the last section of the bill that I saw, of the copy of the bill that I saw. This is the ending part of it. And this is the one saving grace of the bill. It says, nothing in this act shall be construed to diminish or infringe upon any right protected under the First Amendment to the Constitution of the United States. And that's under that section. It's just a very small little section, constitutional protections, and that's all it says. But that protects our First Amendment right, which in turn should protect our religious freedom, right? But still, I mention all this because we still face this same type of opposition, like we see in Acts chapter 19. Thankfully, at Ephesus, for instance, the city clerk was able to calm the crowd there, and the Lord watched over his people. Now, again, I've heard that this was something we had to be worried about and scared of and all this stuff, and I don't think much will come of this bill in the end. I think it's just Congress trying to make themselves look good in some way. They're trying to look like they're doing something effective, I guess. So I don't think anything's going to hurt us there. As far as the protests go, I don't think they're going to have much effect on what's happening in Israel and Gaza because that's thousands of miles away. So I don't think that's really going to be a big deal. But we need to be aware of these things and of the impact that they can have because, Congress jumps and starts making this bill. It could have been much worse. It could have been something really bad, something strange, because they wanted to combat anti-Semitism. So I just want to make sure that we are aware of that, and be aware that we can't believe everything we're told or that we hear. Just a reminder, we can't always trust what we hear either on the internet or in the news media. You have to really do your own research. You can't just hear their outrageous tale or story and just follow that crowd. We have to be careful. We have to do some research. We have to know what's going on. And God actually warns us of this. If we look at Exodus chapter 23, verses 1 and 2, you shall not circulate a false report. Do not put your hand with the wicked to be an unrighteous witness. Now, first, how do we know it's a false report? Well, we've got to do some research, right? We've got to do some due diligence. We've got to find out what we're being told, is that even real? Is that true? And then if it's not true, we don't want to follow along with that, right? So we want to make sure when we hear these accusations, they sound outrageous and maybe they make you mad, and it's easy to get emotional and kind of jump into these things. I mean, I've found myself upset and stuff too, like that. That can happen. We want to make sure that we're checking to make sure we're not just having that knee-jerk reaction to an accusation or a claim that then is turns out later is false. We look at verse 2, you shall not follow a crowd to do evil, nor shall you testify in a dispute so as to turn aside after many to pervert justice. We should be careful that we are actually following Jesus and that we're not getting caught up again in that emotion of the moment. Again, we hear there's something shocking and outrageous. We move straight forward to judgment and condemnation on people. And we want to be careful that we're not doing that. We want to be careful how we receive our news and who we trust. And we want to make sure that we do our own research. We want to stay informed. We do. We want to stay informed, but we want to be cautious in what we accept as true. So a lot of the news media are actually repeating or implying a lot of the same stuff we heard from the protesters about Israel committing genocide and a lot of Hamas type of talking points. And there are reasons for these deceptions, and I believe we know the originator of lies, who that all comes from. And I don't want to get into all the politics. I really wasn't trying to make this about politics. But what I really wanted to do was for us to see that comparison, see that, the Bible is still relevant to today, that these same issues, are still out there, the same spirits. These struggles still continue even today, and we can find examples of almost any of these things in the Bible, going on in the Bible. We can find those and learn from those. So I want us to look at Acts 19, verse 40 in closing. I want us to look at what this is the final thing the clerk said in Acts. For we are in danger of being called in question for today's uproar, there being no reason which we may give to account for this disorderly gathering. So he was reminding them that they could be in trouble. And as I think, I don't remember who. I thought Rome was in control of Ephesus, but you could be found to be in rebellion, for stirring up a crowd and doing that type of thing. And as Christians, we don't want to be involved in these types of things. I think they bring disgrace on us and disgrace on the Lord and the gospel. And finally, I don't want us to be worried or upset about these things. I try to bring things up like this and bring them to our attention because I believe it's important that we're aware of it and that we know. But we also need to remember, though, no matter what's happening, who the victor is, who's coming back for us, where we're going. If we read Revelation chapter 1, verse 7, behold, he is coming with clouds, and every eye will see him, even they who pierced him, and all the tribes of the earth will mourn because of him. Even so, amen. So as Christians, it should encourage us to look forward to that day, and it should also motivate us to share the gospel whenever we have a chance. It will be a wonderful thing when Jesus returns. That'll be something glorious if we're here to see that. And we want everyone to be able to go with the Lord, everyone that we can convince and persuade, right? So we have time for that here now. If anyone here would have that need to come to the Lord, or if anyone here has a need for prayer or something that we could help you with, if there is anything like that, please come forward as we stand and sing.